And Mike Pipher is the archivist for the Rod Serling Archive. For the past 9 years, he has been a volunteer at the Bundy Museum of History and Art in Bing-hamton, New York, Rod Serling's hometown. Mike's role as the volunteer archivist for the Rod Serling Archive is to locate and secure new material for their archive collection and exhibit, catalog existing items, and to present several free programs each year. The programs are called In the Zone, and each program has a specific theme. Their last In the Zone was Rod Serling in Binghamton, presented on June 28th, the 40th anniversary of his death. Other programs were Rod's time travel themes, his war themes, his Christmas themes, and many more. A lot of good stuff over there. And let's see what I have here. In 1971, Mike met Rod Serling at Binghamton's Broome Technical Community College, where he was a student. Mr. Serling was on campus to speak, and Mike was privileged to talk with him for 20 minutes. As a fan of the Twilight Zone after meeting Rod, Mike decided to begin researching and collecting Rod Serling-related material. And that's really cool. Let's go into some of the Bundy Museum of History and Art features. Let's see here. They have changing exhibits of history and local art, a vintage barber shop, African art gallery, an exhibit of early time clocks telling the forgotten story of the origins of IBM, and more, all surrounded by the Victorian grandeur of the National Register listed Harlow E. Bundy House. And this is located at 129 Main Street, Binghamton, New York, 13905. And we'll get all the fine details right here from Mike. I'm sure there's a lot more I can fill you guys in with, but we're going to go ahead and bring Mike in here. And his website is rodserlingarchive.org, and you can also access bundymuseum.org. And please welcome Mike to the show this evening. Hello there, Mike.
Hi, Solaris.
Well, it's welcome to be welcome on board over here.
Great to be a guest on your show.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you on here. So for the listeners who aren't too familiar with you, let's give them a rundown insofar as what you've been up to, what you're working on, and how you got involved. I kind of gave them a rundown insofar as how you got involved with this project, but it's quite fascinating.
Yes, you mentioned that I met Rod twice in 1971. We talked for 20 minutes the first time, 5 minutes the second. So that really sparked interest in me to start researching Rod Serling, which was hard to do then without the internet. But I did start by securing rare 16mm films. I was a collector of films since I was about 8 years old. And I started buying packages of rare television shows in the early 70s, and that's how I began to collect an accumulation of the Twilight Zones on film, the Loner series that I ran into and had never heard about. The Night Gallery series was on, on the air when I met Rod. And so I started doing film and poster conventions around the country for the last 40 years. And I would buy anything and everything Rod Serling, from movie posters, lobby cards, and stills from the 12 movies that Rod wrote, to press books, press kits, photos of Rod, literally anything and everything that we could find. So in 1986, we'll jump ahead, the New York State Historic Society posted a memorial in front of the Binghamton High School where Rod graduated, and that was, June of 1986. I went to that ceremony, met his teacher, Helen Foley, that he had immortalized in a Twilight Zone episode titled Nightmare is a Child. She told me about a new foundation they had just started. It was called the Rod Serling Memorial Committee, urged me to start attending monthly meetings, and within 2 months, I ran the first film festival in the area, and we sold out 800 seats all 3 nights. And then by first week of January, I was elected the first president of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. They changed their name from committee to foundation. And then I stayed with them until 1995 as their archivist. And as my health got worse, I just left, and never left my desires of researching Rod, but left the grind of, doing all of the programs and the work for a while. Mm-hmm. Then in 9 years ago, I got a call, a little over 9 years ago, from a gentleman here in Binghamton that had bought the Harlow Bundy house and the properties, which, as you already mentioned, was the forerunners of the IBM Corporation. And he realized that Rod was from Binghamton and wanted to build a museum and an archive collection. So I was hesitant at first, but I'm glad I got on board. I've been very busy for the last 9.5 years with this project. I was curator for about 7-8 years, and then they changed my title to archivist and historian. And as you mentioned, I do all the acquisitions for the Serling Archive and our permanent exhibit, which went up April 15th of this year.
That's fabulous. I applaud you for all the work you're doing, and I don't think anybody knows as much about Rod Serling as you do, maybe with the exception of his daughter. What do you think?
Well, his daughter Anne, of course, she did a wonderful book 3 years ago, My Dad as I Knew Him, Rod Serling, but it's a completely different book. It's her recollections of growing up with her father, and so she doesn't have the knowledge of the early Binghamton stuff that I have put together. None of the Serlings do, his widow Carol, because I've found so much in the last year. Matter of fact, we went from 3 or 4 sites that the Binghamton Chamber of Commerce would send you to look at for Rod Serling to now 30 different locations. On our website, you can download and print your own tour map of Rod Serling's homes and stores, schools and churches. There's 17 on there, but I actually have 30 now, and we're working on a booklet format, as Paul Harvey would used to say on his radio show, and now the rest of the story, which I would give that information on each and every one of these sites. So even the Serlings do not have any of this information that we put together at the Bundy Museum over the last 9 months, as far as Rod's growing up in Binghamton. And there are some other books that are out. There's a great book from Amy Boyle Johnston that came out in June of this year. It's being done in 3 parts. The first part was printed in June, and it deals with she's not doing anything biographical, strictly his works. She spent 10 years of researching this book. It's available on Amazon, and it's really interesting. It's only on Kindle right now through Amazon, but her second installment comes out before Christmas, and her third installment early next year to complete the book. And I met with her about 2 months ago. She came to the museum to see me, and she gave us some unique material and information as well. A friend of the museum has been really great, Nick Parisi from Long Island. His new book on Rod Serling's complete career, at 190-some thousand words already, should be finished by the end of the year and in print by the end of January. And it's wonderful. He's been here 4 times as a speaker with me. I've traded a lot of museum Serling material to him. We will be credited in the book with photos and credits and information. He's given us a lot of rare things, including a very rare 16-millimeter film from 1955, lost film. It's a kinescope. Just an amazing 1-hour political drama with Charles Colburn. And
Nice.
So he's given us a lot of rare material as well. So I'm really plugging his book. I was hoping to even tie him into the show and call you back and have you put him on with me. I did that once, and it was great to have 2 experts at once playing off of each other. So,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
but
Yeah, anytime.
He had a funeral tonight
Aw.
and didn't get back to me until 9:30. He says, I got to get to bed. But and he'll be great. I'm going to send you all his info. So when his book comes out, you can be one of the first to have him on.
Oh, absolutely. And if you want to join us, if you want to join us, absolutely. Yeah,
He's
I really
absolutely amazing. As a matter of fact, we talked for about a half hour a few hours ago, and he gave me some new information and clarified a few things for me that I can share with your listeners tonight.
Cool.
So that gives you a basic background. We did do another In the Zone. You read the biography from a few months ago I sent you. We did another In the Zone October 10th at the Bundy Museum, and it was Twilight Zone trivia and bloopers. It was a very lighthearted, more entertaining show than the usual educational, informational, meat and potatoes type of show that I like to present. But it was wonderful. We had 57 people. We had a lady and her family came from Ontario. We had 3 families from New Jersey. We had Boston, Washington, D.C. I mean, they came from all over for this program because we also, on that day, revamped the Serling permanent exhibit by about 40%. We changed it out. We have so much material that every 6 months we plan to, change a good portion of the exhibit.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I have to get up there sometime and check it out. It sounds fabulous. It sounds really.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
A matter of fact, a friend of mine moved to your area. She just moved from Louisiana to Colorado a few months ago, and I'm not sure just where, but I think she said she's pretty close when I told her about your show. And she was just at the museum again 2 months ago and saw the exhibit and really enjoyed it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, this sounds wonderful. I'm so glad you do this for Rod Serling. And he's such a legend in so many ways. So this is a real tribute to him.
And the main thing I need to stress is everything we do at the Bundy Museum for Rod Serling is free. We've never charged a penny for any program. For anything we do, we pay the expenses of our guest speakers as we bring them in. We really do a lot for Rod Serling, and I'm hoping Ann Serling will stop in one of these days. I'd love to meet her and show her, what a wonderful job we're trying to do, just preserving her father's legacy.
Oh, absolutely. I think she'd be interested in doing that, no doubt. And I know you had some extra information tonight. If you want to share that with us, I know you mentioned Area 51 to me. Do you want to go in there?
Well, let me backtrack just a second, because you
Okay.
got new listeners since I was on last time, a different show with you. And let me start with, again, Rod Serling's famous hometown quote, because that will tell your listeners why Rod Serling is so important to us in Binghamton. And it says, everybody has to have a hometown, Binghamton's mine. In the strangely brittle, terribly sensitive makeup of a human being, there is a need for a place to hang a hat, or a kind of geographical womb to crawl back into, or maybe just a place that's familiar because that's where you grew up. When I dig back through memory cells, I get one particularly distinctive feeling, and that's one of warmth, comfort, and well being. For whatever else I may have had or lost, or will find, I've still got a hometown. This nobody's going to take away from me.
Very nice.
So it just shows you how, Rod's thought process was concerning Binghamton area. He was a few weeks over 1 year old when they moved here from Syracuse, the family. That was in Rod was born Christmas Day of 1924. He'll be 91. He would be 91 this year. And the family moved here to open a series of grocery stores for his grandfather's chain, the Cooper family grocery stores. So that's how the family ended up here in Binghamton. And we're so thankful that he did, because Rod Serling would probably be known for something today, even if he never lived in Binghamton, but probably not as a writer, because that was not his intent. He took up writing as a form of therapy after being wounded a couple of times in the Philippines during World War II. And, so who knows? But he was so creative, the world would know him for something. I'm just not sure what.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad that we, can claim Rod Serling as our own. He claims us here in Binghamton as his hometown. And many of the things he wrote incorporated different locations. The most famous one being Walking Distance with the Carousel, about going back in time. He lived 8 blocks away from Recreation Park. He would go there and ride the carousel all the time, and play tennis and swim there. And it was a big part of his growing up. And so he really incorporated that whole episode of going back to Homewood, to your hometown. Whenever he came back, even after he left the war and he moved to California and did all of his writing, he would come back once or twice a year. They lived outside of Ithaca College. It's his wife's family's home out there. It was the cottage that was rebuilt and made larger. And so even right through the time he died, he would come back once, twice, 3 times a year, drive the 29, 30 miles, most of the time by himself, just driving around in circles from his home to the different store locations, to where he went to school and where he went to synagogue. And it just was an amazing part of his life. He said he always just, felt he had to come back home as often as possible.
Yeah, it seemed like it was very natural for him. I bet he'd be like rolling in his grave to see what's going on in America right now. It seems like a lot of that nice energy from the old days is kind of fading away.
Yeah, he'd be horrified. I mean, he was so anti-war, period. Rod Serling, in his writings, was the first person to ever bring the aftermath of a nuclear war to television. And of course, that's the famous Time Enough at Last episode with Burgess Meredith, where he's the last survivor on Earth. He was the first person to bring Vietnam to the television, in television shows. He did one episode that puts right on the screen Vietnam War in the date. Another one, later one, in praise of Pip with Bill Mumy and Jack Klugman. The boy grows up and he's dying. He's been wounded in Vietnam, and he just hit home all the time against war. Probably 25% of everything Rod wrote, over 250 teleplays, dealt with war and the horrors of war.
Very deep messages. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he would absolutely be horrified, as you said, with what's going on in the world that way today. A matter of fact, I mentioned Amy Boyle Johnson's book briefly. It's called Unknown Serling. She unearthed for the first time in print in her book about Rod Serling and 4 or 5 other prominent writers being brought to the Pentagon to play war games during the Kennedy administration. And one of the scenarios had to do with Iraq, Iran, and the type of war over there. This goes back to '62, and she talks about it in detail. And she's the first one to ever bring any of this to light. The documents are sealed. She was able to get a copy of them, and then was later made to surrender the copy. And but she shares a lot of the information, and what a unique perspective that we didn't know about Rod being involved with those war games.
Really, that's incredible. It makes you kind of wonder what they wanted. He was quite bright, quite intelligent.
Yes, he was. And right after President Kennedy was assassinated, as a matter of fact, he was sitting in the room watching the motorcade go by the next day. He had been hired by the government to make a film on now President LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, and trying to really plug him and make him popular. Because he wasn't that popular as vice president. Most vice presidents aren't. They don't do that much. You don't have that much to do. And that film can actually be seen. I think I have a link on our website for where you can see the 45-minute film. It's in an archive in Dallas where the president was killed. And we have that film where your viewers, your listeners can go on and view that actual film. It's quite interesting.
Excellent. I've also posted that in the chat as well on the website, so they can go in there. That's incredible. So much information. I had no idea that he was involved in so many different things.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's so much more that we don't even know about.
I was going to say, yeah, that just blows me away.
I haven't read his FBI files, but they're interesting because a couple of my friends have, and I've got to get access to them and read them. But he wasn't ever investigated by the FBI. He created his own FBI file. He asked them to do a file on him.
Wow.
He was so upset in the mid-'50s with the McCarthyism and the blacklisting and the loyalty oaths that he was being accused of being communist. He was accused because he refused to sign a loyalty oath on several occasions. And so he had them do an investigation. And in some of the information that I've turned up about his life in Binghamton, for example, came from his FBI files, from Rod's own writing. The first job he had, other than delivering meats and stuff for his father's butcher shop, was working in what then was Fowler Dick and Walker department store, which is now Boscov department store. But that store is the basis for the After Hours episode, and with the mannequins. Mm-hmm. And he worked in the toy shop, and he had a lifelong fascination with toys. He would buy all these little models and put them together and play with toy cars and planes. And he just had a heyday playing with toys his whole life. And your listeners can go to YouTube and type in Rod Serling Cincinnati, and there's a 2-hour and 6-minute documentary that was done with 8 or 9 people that lived and worked with Rod from the Antioch school days through his first couple of years in radio and television in Cincinnati. And they give you all of these stories. And the one was the toy salesman, and Rod insisted on unpacking all the toys and playing with them in the carport. And it's really some fun information in there.
Oh, that's great.
So we learned about his working in the toy department here. And something else that I never knew was that I knew he worked at WINR Radio in Binghamton as an announcer right after the war. But when he was in high school, he worked for 4 years at WNBF Radio in Binghamton as a student news reporter. And that's in his FBI files, in his own writing. So these are things that we're finding out basically from Rod himself that most people never knew.
Yeah, no kidding. I certainly didn't know that. So you can write your own FBI file. Can I write my own file too?
Well, apparently, whether it's all, his writing, he requested it, and he filled out forms and gave them all this information. So
nice.
I'll just throw in that my FBI file is a lot bigger than Rod's.
Have you looked at your file?
Oh, yeah, I've seen it. I've been called in 2 or 3 times.
What's the point in doing that? Can I just ask you why they even bother?
Well, this is because we're going to talk in the second hour about my film collecting hobby and meeting and knowing 100 celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is I was buying these films in the early 70s. The studios did not want anybody owning 16-millimeter feature films or television shows. As a matter of fact, the stars could not even get their own material, and that's how I was able to, get to the stars, was through the material I had. And so the FBI was bogged down with busting down doors, arresting film collectors, stealing their collections, Roddy McDowell is the most famous. I mean, they just terrorized him, broke his doors down, stole all of his films. Faye Dunaway, the same thing in Long Island. They busted her doors down and stole all of her films. And so I was hauled in for selling videos of some films that I shouldn't have at the time, and actually not selling. That's what saved me from going to prison. A couple of my friends went to jail for a year.
Wow.
And my salvation was I never sold any of them. I gave them away. Mm-hmm. They said had I sold them, it would have been copyright infringement. And then the whole thing became a joke a little later on, because 99% of films that show a copyright on screen are not copyrighted. Star Wars, Sound of Music, all the Disney films, none of them are copyrighted. All they did was print phony copyright notices on the bottom of their works. And beyond that, my nephew, who's my caregiver since I've been in a wheelchair 15 years, his father was a test case for films. That's where I bought a lot of my films back in the mid-'70s, with an actor named Rory Calhoun. And together they were both arrested for transporting films across state lines, if you can believe it. And my nephew's father was so smart, he went to a Kmart store and bought a little 8mm film of Star Wars, a 5-minute version, and the same thing of Sound of Music. And he took them into court, and the case was dismissed. And here's why. The copyright law read at the time that if a copyright holder sells as much as one frame of their work, it voids the copyright.
Oh, wow.
So they walked out, case dismissed, and that was the end of it. So, I mean, the FBI admitted to me that 2 or 3 times they came that this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be bogged down doing this. The only case that it was important was anti-pornography. And, you know, that was important and still is in some areas, especially with child pornography the way it is on the internet. So I can understand knocking down doors and going after people like that, but just a collector like myself that was, you know, harmless. And ironically, the reason the films got into my hands is because the studios got tired of paying monthly storage rentals for air temperature controlled vaults. And it was a very expensive process to keep these films, and they weren't making any money off them. So they would close the vaults and throw the stuff in the dumpsters. Somebody would get wind of it. They'd go and unbury the dumpsters and take the film. And it's amazing that so many lost films, especially silent era films, and live kinescopes from the 50s of live shows have survived only because of collectors like myself.
Mm-hmm. Really, I'm really grateful that you actually did save some of those films. My goodness.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just more and more, there's examples of it, of where, you know, Turner Classic Movies just 2 weeks ago has been running some lost films, a lost Houdini film that survived through the widow, and somebody's had it for 30 years, and Turner got wind of it, and they restored it and put a soundtrack on and put it on a couple of weeks ago.
Nice.
So it's great that things like this can be preserved, and the same is true of Rod Serling works.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Well, how hard is it to restore the film if it's damaged?
Well, what they do, what they do is one frame at a time they digitize now. And so they make a digital format, and they can clean up quite a bit on the digital, on the computer image. In the case of this Houdini that I just mentioned, you'll still see some splotches where the emulsion is gone, where some of the print is gone. But you can't do anything more to bring it back, but you can preserve what's there. And some of the films are amazing quality. For example, I had a 35mm, which is theatrical size film, nitrate, which is highly explosive. Just, you know, you blow cigarette smoke on it and you're going to blow the film up and burn the house down at the theaters. So nitrate film went out probably back in the 40s, maybe even the 30s. But I had a silent movie, nitrate, of The Bells, which was Boris Karloff's first American film.
Oh, wow. And
the print was absolutely mint condition in a metal canister, 7 or 8 reels. They were all hand-colored. It was just an amazing find. So, you know, I had that professionally transferred to film, and, you know, that's been selling around the country and around the world for years now. So, you know, again, it's just a case of I paid $50 for it, and I sold the film for a lot of money. And then there was a 3-sheet movie poster, a jumbo movie poster of it down under that I sold to a dealer for $500.
Nice.
So there's things out there that, excuse me, that people still find.
Right. That's awesome.
Get the water here.
Yeah, grab some water. And I was going to mention, we touched on this before on my other show, but I did want to bring to the attention of the listeners, and maybe they realize it or not, I don't know. But Rod Serling wrote the ending to the original Planet of the Apes. And I thought that was fascinating when I heard about that.
Yes, Nick Parisi's book that's coming out that I just mentioned has a major chapter on Planet of the Apes. And it turned out when I first spoke with you that I was basing from Roddy McDowell's documentary on Planet of the Apes that Rod wrote 30 different drafts. And Nick had corrected me and said in his research for his book, he only found 3. And then when he was here October 10th at my program as one of my speakers, he apologized in public and says, well, Mike, it wasn't 30, but it wasn't 3. The Ithaca College, where Rod was teaching when he died, has 14 different drafts that Rod wrote for the original Planet of the Apes.
Oh, wow.
So, and of course, the ending, we do have the second original draft from 1964, 4 years before the movie was made. Rod was hired as the solo writer. And after doing all these versions, he was still working on Twilight Zone last season at the time. And the project was just getting shelved for various reasons, mainly the cost factor. But in our second draft is the ending with the iconic Statue of Liberty scene. That, you know, my God, we've been here on Earth all the time.
Great.
And, you know, that scene has been reviewed by critics, you know, New York Times or the Post is saying it's the most iconic twist ending in the history of motion pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And so researching since I talked with you, the book was written in France by Pierre Boulez, and his original ending was using the LAX, Los Angeles Airport. And I said, no wonder Rod changed it, because nobody in the world, unless you've been in and out of that airport, would know what that design was. It just wouldn't fit the ending. So Rod did the ending with the Statue of Liberty, part in tribute to France, who gave us the Statue of Liberty, mm-hmm. and the writer being from France. So it turned out to be a nice tribute, although the author really didn't care for it at the time, but I think it was the best thing that Rod could have done.
Oh, gosh, yes. Yeah, it's just, once again, it leaves that haunting image and message, you know, which is timeless. There's something about it. It's so foreboding.
Yeah, and a lot of people asked, did Rod have anything to do with the other 8 movies? And yes and no. He did do, there is one script that he wrote for the second movie, but they didn't use any of it, and he wanted out. There's the same thing, projects getting tossed about, and they wanted a rush job to capitalize on the money from the first movie, and just like Charlton Heston wanted out, so he gets himself killed off right at the beginning for the second movie. So, you know, he did have a little involvement, but none of what he did was used in the second film. And
wow.
So back to from 64, when he wrote the original scripts himself, then they brought him back in 67 as not co-writer, but a second writer. Michael Wilson was now the head writer, and Rod Serling was still a head writer. And they didn't write together, but they used little bits and pieces of both of their writings. But Rod's iconic ending, of course. And actually, when you go through the 2 scripts, I have them both, it's 90% Rod's, even though he was listed second, Michael Wilson first, and then Rod Serling.
It definitely has that signature of Rod Serling. I would have never thought it had you not mentioned it to me. I would have never known. That's fascinating. There's no doubt. Now, when Rod Serling's episodes, a few were banned from television. Is that correct?
One episode was banned from television.
Okay.
And it was the encounter with George Takei from Star Trek. And the storyline on that, I almost sent you that. I'm going to have to one of these days so you can watch it. The print that we have is interesting because it was Rod's own print with the original commercials that his wife let us copy back in 1986. And it was banned from TV because they had thousands and thousands of letters and complaints from the Japanese around the world, and from a lot of American war historians, too. The storyline involved George Takei as a gardener, and his boss says, I'll hire you, I'll pay you extra, come on upstairs and help me clean out my attic. So these 2 gentlemen, the American soldier and the Japanese are talking in the attic, and they come across an old sword. And the sword, the American had picked up off of a Japanese soldier when he killed him. So that didn't set too well with George Takei's character. Then come to find out, George Takei's father was the one that was in Pearl Harbor and showed the planes where to come and destroy Pearl Harbor. So they end up killing each other. And actually, Takei kills the American almost at his request, and then he jumps out and commits suicide himself, jumping out of the window. It was just such a hard topic. The United States soldiers felt that it was just reliving the war that we didn't need to do, and the Japanese, of course, were really upset because of portraying the war the way the episode did. So they said it will never be seen again, CBS said. And they were so strict with that Carol Serling, when she gave it to us to show at our first film festival in '86, she allowed me to copy it to VHS and to show it to George Takei at a Star Trek convention. And I have the letter from Carol, and it says, for God's sake, you can't tell them where you got this. So that's how protected they were of it. Now it's a moot point because 10 years ago, as DVDs got popular, the Twilight Zone box set finally included it into the box set. So that's the only one that was literally banned from television after it aired the one time.
Wow, that's pretty interesting right there. And I know we've talked about this off air, but you mentioned that there was a really ominous black cloud that kind of descended onto the hospital when Rod Serling died.
Yes, I've gotten this from two stories. I personally called the hospital up in Rochester, Strong Memorial, probably, 87 or 8 as I was working with the foundation. And I said, is there anybody working there that was working with Rod Serling when he had a surgery and he passed away? And they said, yes, as a matter of fact, there's a nurse still working there that is the lady that wheeled him down on the gurney into the OR. So I got to speak with her, and she told me that 5 minutes before Rod went into surgery, they allowed him to have a cigarette. That's how, and I mean, how stupid. But, I mean, that was Rod Serling. And, sometimes you don't say no. And, that could have had a part. He died 10 hours into the surgery with a third massive heart attack. And, it's a shame, being a chain smoker. He admitted to 5 packs a day. Some of the family sources have said up to 8 packs a day. And then the caffeine, coffeeaholic and some alcohol, it just took its toll on him. But I also think part was genetics because his father died at 52 of a heart attack while Rod was in the Philippines, or actually in Japan then at the time, right after the war. So, it's a combination of the three. But then Mike Weinstein, who bought the Bundy homes and built the museum and brought me in, he called and spoke to somebody that was there working, and they said when Rod passed away, this dark cloud came right down and enveloped the whole hospital. You could not see the hospital. And how long it stayed or whatever, I don't know. That's quite bizarre.
It is really interesting considering all of his storylines and the kind of eerie, background he's had with all of his writing and scripts. It just seems to me very ominous. Yeah, makes you wonder if something didn't just retrieve him. Well, very interesting indeed. Yeah.
I mentioned, we just mentioned briefly Area 51. And it's not a direct tie to Rod, but it's Serling. So I'm going to tell you a little, this information just came to me. I just got the book in Friday. So cool. It's really fresh. And I found on eBay this book listed is written by Rod Serling, and of course it wasn't. It's called The Only Way to Fly, 1976. So I knew right away it was his older brother, Robert Serling. Robert was 7 years older than Rod, and he is a world historian on aviation history. So he wrote a series of books on aviation. And this particular book, what caught my eye was the inscription. It's signed on the front page in there. And it's inscribed for Frank and Ann Powers with admiration, esteem, and my most personal regards, R.J. Serling. Now, do you know who Frank Powers was?
No.
Okay, it's sort of an unfair question because you're young. But back in Frank Powers was on a spy mission with a new secret plane from Area 51, the first U-2, and he was on a spy plane over Russia when he was shot down by a ground-to-air missile. He was 30,000 feet. He was able to parachute. He survived the parachute jump, but was incarcerated immediately and held for years as a prisoner. And finally, President Eisenhower, in May of 1960, admitted that he was on a secret spy mission for the CIA. And we did a trade-off 2 years later with President Kennedy for a KGB agent that was a spy here in the United States. So that's how we got him back. But the interesting tie-in with Area 51 is in 1955, there were 14 pilots on way to Area 51 to test this new U-2 secret plane. Their plane crashed on the mountains and they were all killed. So the only one that was left to bring in was Frank Powers, who was then transferred to Area 51 to test and become the pilot of this U-2 spy plane. And so it's an amazing piece of history, period. Mm-hmm. And our Bundy Museum is actually called the Bundy Museum of History and Art. And so I'm so thrilled. I mean, this really belongs in the Cold War Museum, which Frank Powers' son and his widow created. But it's just an amazing piece of history. Mm-hmm. And it's also written in 76. Rod died June 28th of 75, right before the book was printed. And so it's dedicated to the memory of my brother Rod. So I mean that's important for us too.
Oh, absolutely.
So, although it's not a big Rod Serling tie-in, it's still the Serling family, and it's interesting because talking about celebrities, John Travolta, I had talked with him for 20 minutes at a hotel in New York, and he had learned to fly planes from Robert Serling.
Wow.
And so he and Robert did a lot of work on some books together, and so I was staying at a hotel in New York. It's a famous hotel called the Wyndham Hotel, and nobody can just go and check in. You have to be a celebrity, a sports personality, a big name movie star, a newspaper reporter, whatever. You have to be in the trades. But Imogen Coca and her husband got me a suite there. So when I came out to get my car, there was a concrete bench, and I'm sitting down waiting for my car, and out walks John Travolta and sits down next to me. And needless to say, he got his car before I did. But it took 20 minutes, and we were able to sit and talk. And he had just finished the, not Grease, but the Saturday Night Fever at the time. So it was interesting. So realizing, that connection where I had met him, that would have been 78, when I was doing a celebrity auction for Rod Serling Foundation, trying to raise money for different projects we were working on, mainly a mobile display unit to take to the schools and educate the students on Rod. I sent letters out to 500 celebrities, and John sent back not just a signed photo, but he sent an actual prop from a TV movie he had just done where it was a sweater vest, and it had a hole where a gun came through and the wire and a mechanism where he was supposed to be shot. Just a really nice piece. And a friend of mine has an antique shop, and he actually bought that from the auction and still has that to this day. So, it's nice to be able to tie John Travolta to Serling a little bit, via his brother.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty incredible right there. And I know we're going to get into the Hollywood aspect of it and more Hollywood in the next hour. But I did want to thank you. You did send me some really cool DVDs and some episodes that Christmas for Sweeney, and I've been looking at some of these old archived episodes of the Twilight Zone and just his work in general. Also that Western series, which was really cool. It's really kind of interesting, The Loner, that it wasn't really advertised as much. Now, you said that one ran from 1965 to 1966?
Yes, it was scheduled for one season, which back then was 39 episodes, but it was canceled after 26.
Okay.
And the story behind The Loner was, it was, as you now have seen a few of them, was a Civil War Western period. The pilot episode, which you watched, has Lloyd Bridges' character killing a young boy, 5 minutes basically before he gets word that the war was over. And he can't draw that line, saying that, if this was 5 minutes later, it would be murder. But yet, because it was 5 minutes earlier before I got the message, it was sanctioned by the government, so it was legal to kill that young boy. And so he struggles with that and decides he's going to retire from his commission after all those years in the war, and he's going to become a loner. He's going to travel the country and find himself. So it was envisioned first by Rod. Actually, back in 1964, Rod wrote the synopsis for this to be a 1-hour show, not a half hour. And the CBS turned it down. And then it was while Rod was in Japan a few years later that they called him. He was doing some project over there and says, "We do want to do your Western series." They said, "We don't need a pilot episode to show the sponsors because we're going on your track record with Twilight Zone, and we're going on Lloyd Bridges' star status from Sea Hunt." And so there was no pilot actually filmed. And so what I think CBS thought they were buying was a typical Bonanza, Gunsmoke type of a Western with lots of action, lots of shoot 'em up. And what they got, as you can testify to now to your listeners, was a very hard drama series, typical themes of, from racism to just to sort of a comedy with Westward the Shoemaker, just not a shoot 'em up type of series. And it got to the point that after 13 weeks that was approved to be filmed and aired, that the executives wanted, I think it was Andy White, wanted more violence and more shoot 'em up. And Rod said, "No." He said, "That's not what you hired. You hired me to do my series, and that's what this is, stories with morals and teaching." And yes, there's gunplay in all of them. Yes, there's death in some of them, but not the actual shoot 'em up cowboys that they thought they were getting. Well, they did sign on for another 13 episodes, and near the end, near the end of that, Lloyd Bridges told me this himself. I was at his house for dinner on several occasions, and he said that they were on the set, and Rod was rarely on the set. Like Twilight Zone, he was on the set almost every day, but The Loner, he was rarely on set. But they were there together, and this executive came up to him and said, "Rod, we're going to cancel the show. You're not giving us the action and the violence that we want." And Rod said, "Hey, I told you to write it yourself if you don't like." And they just fought to the point that Rod literally decked him and knocked him out cold right there at the set. And the show was canceled, and they did not do the last 13 episodes.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that's never been in print anywhere, but that's right in Lloyd Bridges' living room story to me of, witnessing that event. And so, I don't know if Nick's going to use any of that info in his book or not, but it's an amazing series. So I'm going to ask you a question now that you've watched some of these. To me, and to a lot of critics, some of the episodes received critical acclaim, especially The Homecoming of Lemuel Stowe, which is one that I asked you to screen. And I tell your listeners your take on it. I mean, such a powerful piece against racism, even Civil War era racism. What did you feel about the piece?
Well, it's very dramatic, and the one thing I noticed was the acting and the depth of the acting. In other words, there's nowadays when you watch a film or you watch any type of script or you listen to a script, there's nothing in there that really has substance. There was a lot of substance, there's a lot of intensity. I thought the acting was always really intense. That's the one thing I pick up on is lighting and acting, and of course the dialogue. So for me, I find it very impactful, and also there's a stillness to there's just a stillness to the whole scenery, which I can't really describe other than the fact that it's like all the noise is taken away from the background, and it's just real events happening in time. I think he's able to capture a snapshot of the way he saw things maybe in the military when he was in the war, but also how he's seen things throughout. At least that was my impression when I was watching the footage. And I do thank you for sending it to me because it's been very meaningful. These are things I would never normally watch, so it's really nice to take a good view. And nowadays you can't find this kind of a film. I mean, you just can't find the videos. And so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, the Loners have never been released. 20th Century Fox made them. They've never been released for sale. They've never been re-syndicated. And I imagine somewhere down the line that a box set will come out because there's so much interest in Rod Serling's works that I think it merits and would make a good saleable item. But Rod Serling, in one of his letters I read or speeches or whatever, said that he felt that particular episode, The Homecoming of Lemuel Stowe, is one of the best things he ever wrote in his whole life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can see that.
And
Well,
it's just,
all of his writing is incredible anyway. I mean, it's kind of like it's just perfection after perfection, in my opinion. I think he's really phenomenal in what he's done. Another thing I also wanted to bring to light was also No Gods to Serve. I thought that was really awesome too. So there's a lot in there insofar as the messages, like you were talking about earlier. There's depth to his writing, and even for Christmas for Sweeney, which I sit there and I watch these things, and it's like going back in time, but he's capturing something in energy that I think we've lost on this timeline.
yeah, let's talk about Christmas for Sweeney first for a minute, because it's the first thing that Rod Serling ever sold to a television other than local live Cincinnati shows when he was still there. In 1950, Rod Serling sold the strip for $50 directly to Bruce Cabot, the star of the show. Now, Bruce Cabot, for your listeners, might not mean much, but he was the star of the original King Kong movie. He was a big name in that era. And somehow Bruce Cabot got wind of this, and he literally bought the script. And this information comes from that same Cincinnati story with people that lived with Rod. And this one man and his wife, they were married one day apart from Rod and his wife, Carol. They both went to school at the same time. They lived right across the hall from each other, like in a dorm-style trailer place. And he said that in the middle of the night, Rod Serling came busting into our bedroom. He says, we never locked our doors then. And he says, thank God nothing was going on, because I said, Rod, what are you doing? It's the middle of the night. And he's waving this check. He says, I just sold my first script. I just sold my first script for $50. And he says, who bought it? And he said, Bruce Cabot. And he says, are you going to keep the check for the autograph? He says, hell no, I'm going to go to the bank tomorrow and deposit it. You come with me, you know. So, but that's how close they were, the wives. And he says it was so funny because you could tell what Rod and Carol had for dinner, because their food would come up in this guy's drains, and then their food would come up in Rod and his wife's drains, and it was just that type of a living situation. And so that's an important piece, and that's why I sent it to you. When I stumbled on that, and I bought that at a film convention in the late 70s, as I joined the foundation, Carol Serling was the advisor on the board, and she still is. She's got to be about 89 or 90. And I said, Carol, do you know anything about the film? She says, I never heard of it. Rod didn't write that. I said, yes, he did. I said, I've got the darn film in my hands. And I said, I'll send you the video of it. Tell me what you think. So she comes back with the letter, and she says, it's a piece of garbage. Don't you dare show that at the film festival. And I says, you or nobody is going to tell me I'm not going to show this at the film festival. I says, I bought it. It's now in the property of the foundation. And I said, it needs to be seen as an important historic piece. So it's what I call a fluff and nonsense piece. It's just typical Christmas sappiness, which I happen to love. I love anything Christmas. And Helen Foley, his teacher, was, that brought me into the foundation. She said the same thing. This is garbage. We can't show this. So the Serlings didn't even have it. And a lot of other rare films that I uncovered over the years, the Serlings never had them either. So it was great to be able to supply Carol Serling. Whether she ever gave copies to Ann and Jody, the daughters, I don't know. But the Christmas for Sweeney was fun. And it's important for another reason. Rod Serling was the first person to present black people in television.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember in that story, you have 2 or 3 young black children in the chorus,
right,
singing on 2 or 3 different occasions. But that went on from there through the mid-50s, that Rod would use black people in starring roles. He's the first person that ever starred a black person in a Twilight Zone. I mean, Rod was so anti-hatred, prejudice, bigotry, that he did all he could to, make his case that, everybody needs to love one another and take care of one another, and there's no differences. Mm-hmm. And so we're so thankful for Rod that, he did a lot of that type of thing.
He certainly did.
What I find interesting about Christmas for Sweeney and a lot of things Rod wrote, remember, he was born Jewish. He converted to Unitarianism to marry his wife, Carol Kramer, when they were at Antioch, when they met. And yet everything he wrote concerning Christmas is from the really evangelical Christmas point of view. I mean, right down to some of it, talking about Jesus Christ as Savior. I mean, really some fundamental Christian doctrine, not the Jewish doctrine, not the Unitarian view. I was playing piano in churches for 40-some years, And I went to a Unitarian church for some reason. I don't remember why. Actually, the one Rod went to when he was here. And their hymn book, I wouldn't call anything in it a hymn. I opened it up, and the first song was "On a Clear Day, I Can See You Can See Forever," Barbara Streisand. I said, "Those are hymns," you know. So it just blew me away. But it's just unique that Rod wrote from the Christian perspective a lot of beautiful material. Mm-hmm. Another example that I really love is the Night Gallery. One of the few that I really do love is Edward G. Robinson in A Christmas Story, The Messiah on Mott Street. But there he incorporates his Jewish faith with the Jewish Messiah. He has the black gentleman as the supposed Messiah that the boy thinks this tall black man looming dark against the sky is the Messiah. And yet it has a traditional Christmas. It has everything rolled up into one. It's just an amazing, beautiful piece. Mm-hmm. I guess part of Rod's growing up was his mother was Orthodox Jew from the history, and the rest of the family was what you would call, like, I was Baptist, so Harry Truman said he was a Lightfoot Baptist. You know, he liked to sing, drink, and dance. Well, the same thing in Rod's case. Sam Serling, his father, talked to the boys and says, look, I'm not really into my religion very much. I'm going to leave that up to you to decide what you want to do with it. I can't judge a man by where he goes to church or where he goes to pray.
And Mike, we're going to head for a break. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back here at Ravenstar's Witching Hour. My special guest is Mike Pipher.